The ancient Egyptians left behind a vast cultural legacy, including the Egyptian pyramids and the Sphinx. However, for a long time, much about these structures remained a mystery, and researchers could only speculate with questionable theories. To unravel these mysteries, popular podcaster Joe Rogan invited guests to share secrets about the Egyptian Sphinx. What do these enormous structures conceal, and how old are they really? In this video, we'll follow Joe Rogan and delve into chilling facts about the Egyptian Sphinx. You may have heard that in 2021, after years of reconstruction, Egypt ceremoniously opened the ancient Sphinx Avenue. It features over 1,000 statues of these mythical creatures. The ancient avenue, nearly 3 kilometers long and about 75 meters wide, was once called the Path of God. It connected the Luxor Temple to the Karnak Temple, located further up the Nile River to the north. Zahi Hawass, an Egypt archaeologist who worked on the restoration of the Sphinx Avenue from 2005 to 2011, referred to Luxor as the largest open-air museum, the largest archaeological monument in the world, narrating Egypt's history from the 20th century BCE, known as the 11th dynasty, to the Roman period. However, there is another Sphinx that attracts much more attention: the Great Sphinx on the western bank of the Nile in Giza. If you know Joe Rogan well, you'd agree that he doesn't shy away from hosting guests whose views diverge from the mainstream. Thus, he invited Professor Robert Schoch to discuss the origin and age of the Great Sphinx. The expert Egyptologist presented evidence that the Giza Sphinx is much older than conventionally believed, although the entire scientific community does not necessarily agree. But what does this scientific community think about this ancient structure? The Sphinx is a zoomorphic creature found in the mythology of various cultures. In ancient Egyptian art, it was most commonly depicted as an animal with the body of a lion and the head of a human, typically a high-ranking individual such as a pharaoh. In ancient Egypt, the Sphinx served as a spiritual guardian and was often depicted as a man wearing the pharaoh's headdress, much like the Great Sphinx. Figures of these creatures were frequently depicted and placed in tombs and temple complexes. The depictions of sphinxes from Egypt migrated to Asia and Greece around the 15th to 16th centuries BCE. The Asian Sphinx, unlike the Egyptian model, had beautiful eagle wings and was often portrayed in a feminine form. It would be depicted crouching with one raised paw. In Greek mythology, the mythical Sphinx also had wings and a serpent tail. Legends describe it as a guardian that devoured travelers who couldn't solve its riddles. The name by which the ancient Egyptians referred to the Great Sphinx during its heyday remains unknown, since the word Sphinx is first mentioned in Greek mythology approximately 2,000 years after the statue was constructed. It is also unclear how the ancient Egyptians regarded the great statue. Nevertheless, the statue gradually began to disappear into the desert at the end of the Old Kingdom and was subsequently ignored for centuries. Inscriptions on the pink granite slab between the paws of the Great Sphinx tell the story of the statue's rescue from the sands of time. According to legend, Prince Thutmose, son of Amenhotep II, fell asleep near the Sphinx. He dreamt that the statue, calling itself Harmonkis, complained about its pitiful condition and made a deal with the young prince. If he helped the statue become a pharaoh, it would assist him in becoming a pharaoh in return. The prince, upon becoming Pharaoh Thutmose IV, introduced the worship of the Sphinx among his people. Statues, paintings, and reliefs of the figure appeared throughout the country, and the Sphinx became a symbol of royal power and solar strength. However, Tutmosis' efforts proved insufficient to save the Sphinx, and eventually it was forgotten once again. Its body and face suffered from erosion and the passage of time. While some stories claim that Napoleon's troops shot off the statue's nose upon their arrival in Egypt in 1798, drawings from the 18th century suggest that the nose was missing long before that. It is more likely that it was intentionally destroyed by a Muslim Sufi in the 15th century as a protest against idolatry. Parts of the emblem of the royal cobra on the Sphinx's headdress and the sacred beard also suffered damage, with the latter currently on display at the British Museum. In fact, the Sphinx was buried in sand up to its shoulders until the early 1800s. At that time, an adventurous Genoese named Giovanni Battista Caviglia attempted to excavate the statue with a team of 160 people, but they were unsuccessful. Further attempts to uncover the statue were made by Auguste Mariette, a French archaeologist who managed to clear some of the sand around the sculpture. He was followed by French archaeologist Émilie Barise, who conducted another major excavation. However, it was not until the late 1930s that Egyptian archaeologist Salim Hassan finally freed the creature from its sandy tomb. Today, the Sphinx continues to deteriorate due to wind, humidity, and pollution. Restoration work has been ongoing since the mid-1900s, some of which has been unsuccessful and ultimately caused further damage to the Sphinx. There is now no doubt that the Great Sphinx is quite old, a point even Robert Schoch agrees with. The only debatable question is how old the statue is. The most common and widely accepted theory about the Great Sphinx suggests that it was erected by the pharaoh Khafre, who reigned approximately from 2547 to 2521 BCE. In hieroglyphic inscriptions, it is believed that Khafre's father, Pharaoh Khufu, built the Great Pyramid, the ancient and greatest of the three pyramids in Giza. When Khafre became pharaoh, he ordered the construction of his own pyramid adjacent to his father's pyramid. Although Khafre's pyramid was 3 meters shorter than the Great Pyramid, it was surrounded by more complexes that included the Great Sphinx and other statues. A small amount of red pigment on the face of the Sphinx suggests that the statue may have been painted. Considering the structure of the pyramids and the Sphinx, some researchers believe that the Great Sphinx and the temple complex may have served a celestial purpose. That is, the resurrection of the pharaoh's soul through the alignment of solar and other divine forces onto Khafre. There is additional evidence connecting the Great Sphinx to Pharaoh Khafre and his temple complex. Firstly, the head and face of the Sphinx bear a striking resemblance to a life-size statue of Khafre that Auguste Mariette discovered in a nearby valley temple in the mid-1800s. Additionally found were remnants of a processional road that connected the valley temple to the funerary temple near Khafre's pyramid. In addition, in the 1980s, researchers claimed that the limestone blocks used in the walls of the Sphinx temple were taken from the quarry surrounding the great statue. This suggests that the workers transported the blocks from the quarry to the Sphinx temple when they were being cut away from the Great Sphinx during its construction. Researchers estimated that it would have taken 3 years for 100 people to carve the Great Sphinx out of a single limestone mass. However, over the years, numerous other theories about the origin of the Great Sphinx have been proposed, most of which have been debunked by leading Egyptologists. Some theories suggest that the face of the Sphinx actually resembled Khufu, and therefore Khufu built the structure. On the other hand, there is an argument that it depicts Pharaoh Djedefre, the older half-brother of Khafre and another son of Khufu, who erected the statue in memory of his father. Other theories claim that the statue represents Amenemhat II, based on the style of stripes found on the Sphinx's headdress. However, Robert Schoch disagrees with all of this. He shook the world in the early 1990s by stating that the Sphinx is several thousand years older than previously believed. Professor Robert Schoch is a faculty member at the College of General Studies at Boston University. In 1983, he earned his PhD in geology and geophysics from Yale University. In 2014, Professor Schoch became an honorary professor at the Nikola Vapsatov Naval Academy in Varna, Bulgaria, in recognition of his work on ancient civilizations. And in 2017, he was appointed as the director of the Institute for the Study of the Origins of Civilization at Boston University. Schoch's recent research has focused on cataclysms that ended the previous epoch of Earth around 9700 BCE and simultaneously led to the demise of advanced civilizations of that time. The overwhelming body of evidence gathered from various fields of knowledge presented in his book, Forgotten Civilization, indicates that powerful solar flares were the cause of these cataclysms. Robert Schoch first traveled to Egypt with John Anthony West in 1990 with the sole purpose of studying the Great Sphinx from a geological perspective. Initially, he believed that the Egyptologists were correct in their dating, but soon discovered that the geological findings contradicted their claims. It didn't take him long to realize that something was amiss. All he had to do was look at the Sphinx. It's important to note that his shock stemmed from the determination to prove West's theory of the Sphinx's date of appearance at Giza wrong. The discovery was made half a century ago by a little-known French scientist named René Schwaller de Lubitz. Schwaller surveyed the Egyptian temple at Luxor from 1937 to 1952. The measurements he made and other detailed observations of the ruins revealed previously unknown geometric relationships, which were later confirmed by French archaeologists. Schwaller discovered similar relationships in other locations as well. In 1949, he reported his findings, and in 1957, he presented a more detailed report. The reviewer of the Journal of Near Eastern Studies called on his colleagues to take Schwaller's work seriously as it challenges the notion of Egypt's insufficient mathematical literacy and offers a new level of Egyptian religious beliefs. However, Schwaller's work also sparked numerous disputes. Schwaller discovered a peculiar physical anomaly within the complex of the Giza pyramids. He noticed that the erosion on the Sphinx was significantly different from the erosion on other structures. Schwaller then hypothesized that the erosion on the Sphinx was caused by water, not wind-blown sand. At that time, no one understood the implications of this observation, and it remained virtually unnoticed until the 1970s, when independent Egyptologist John Anthony West raised the issue. West compared the erosion on the Sphinx, the temples, and the walls of the complex with the erosion on other structures on the Giza Plateau. The stones of the Sphinx and its surrounding walls were heavily weathered, giving it a weathered appearance. The edges were rounded, and deep cracks were visible. On the surfaces of other structures on the plateau, only sharper tracers of wind and sand erosion were evident. Egypt experienced millennia of abundant rainfall, marking the post-glacial shift of the temperature-climate zone to the north. This period lasted from approximately 10,000 to 5,000 BCE, and by its end, the Sahara transformed from a green savanna into a desert. Then, from around 4000 to 3000 BCE, a shorter but more intense period of rainfall occurred, which ceased by the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. West proposed that the distinctive weathering patterns on the Sphinx complex were caused by post-glacial flooding, suggesting that the Sphinx was carved during or even before this period. However, authoritative archaeologists flatly rejected West's theory. Nevertheless, West managed to convince Schoch to investigate this issue in 1990, and they found themselves in Giza in June of that year. Schoch discovered significant erosional damage on the body of the Sphinx, depressions that formed after the Sphinx's body was carved out of the bedrock. This led him to conclude that the only possible cause could have been rain and water runoff. He also noted that the Sphinx is located on the edge of the Sahara Desert, a region that has been fairly arid for the past 5,000 years. Furthermore, several structures reliably dated to the Old Kingdom period show only wind and sand erosion, which is distinct from water erosion. Schoch concluded that the oldest parts of the Great Sphinx, known as the core body, must date back to an earlier period, at least 5000 BCE. However, it's also possible that it dates back to the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 BCE, when the climate was very different and accompanied by significant rainfall. People wonder. They ask, couldn't it be a rise in the flooding of the Nile? No. Geologically, that would show a very different pattern on the rock. It's not a flooding from below, it is precipitation and rainfall coming from above, shared Robert Schoch. Many people disagreed with the idea that the Great Sphinx could be so old because its head clearly belongs to the time of the Egyptian dynasties, which began no earlier than 3000 BCE. However, upon closer examination, one can observe that the head is disproportionate to the body. Schoch claims that the current head is not original. The original head would have deteriorated due to weather conditions and erosion. Later, during the Egyptian dynasties, it was recarved, resulting in a naturally reduced size. In fact, it's even possible that the Sphinx was not originally a sphinx. It could have been a lion, but according to the latest data, it was a lioness. To further test the theory, Schoch conducted seismic investigations around the base of the statue to measure the depths of subsurface weathering. His team used a sledgehammer to strike a steel plate, creating sound waves that penetrated the rock, reflected, and returned to the surface. This provided information about the properties of the subsurface layer of limestone rock. Analyzing the data obtained, Schoch discovered that the extraordinary depth of subsurface weathering confirmed his conclusion that the Sphinx's body was built around 5000 BCE or even earlier. During the seismic investigations, the team also discovered something else, a cavity or chamber beneath the left paw of the Sphinx. Some speculate that it could be a room for records. Researchers also found several small cavities beneath and around the Sphinx. The data obtained suggests that a tunnel could run along the entire length of the Sphinx's body. When Schoch initially proposed that the Great Sphinx was much older than previously believed, Egyptologists challenged him, demanding evidence of an earlier civilization that could have built the Sphinx. They were confident that there was no advanced culture or civilization before 3000 or 4000 BCE. However, even in Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a temple complex that is over 12,000 years old, there is no evidence of an advanced civilization. But why these early glimpses of civilization and high culture disappeared, only to reappear thousands of years later, remains a major mystery. In October 1991, Schoch and West decided to present their research findings in Giza to the Geological Society of America, and the reaction they received was inspiring. Several hundred geologists agreed with the logic of their arguments, and dozens of them offered their practical assistance and advice for further research. However, there were other geologists who expressed two doubts in newspaper interviews and private correspondence. One individual questioned whether the seismic refraction data corresponded to natural variations within the rock layer. Indeed, the seismic profile did not match the natural dip of the rock. Another geologist speculated that the Sphinx as a whole, not just its head, was a natural rock outcrop. One of the critical counterarguments to Schoch's theory is that it's not necessary to go back to the last ice age to explain the water damage at Giza. Throughout history, the Nile region has experienced several instances of heavy rainfall and significant floods. W.F. Humi, the director of the Geological Survey of Egypt at the time, described the destruction and erosion caused by these storms in his book, Geology of Egypt, published in 1925. He wrote, "It should not be forgotten that rains in the desert lead to floods. A vast amount of water, in many cases, cannot cope with the existing channels, and as a result, it finds new paths along lines of least resistance. Deep channels cut through the looser beds." Furthermore, Zahi Hawass, the director of the Giza Antiquities Department, observes the same erosion patterns on a daily basis that Schoch talked about. Large layers continually form on certain parts of the Sphinx's surface, much to the dismay of archaeologists and conservators who have yet to reach a consensus on their causes and how to address them. However, they agree on one point. The erosion is clearly not caused by rainfall associating with the melting glaciers of the Ice Age, as Schoch claims. Wind, water, weathering, sand, and the crystallization of salts naturally present in the limestone after they dissolve with morning dew. All these are possible mechanisms. The temple megaliths in the valley also show the exact same type of water erosion as seen on the Sphinx itself. Interestingly, the surviving granite blocks are worked in such a way that their inner surfaces precisely replicate the shape of the supporting limestone blocks that have already undergone extensive erosion by this time. Since the granite facing looks similar to other Egyptian architectural structures from the Old Kingdom, this can be considered additional evidence supporting the hypothesis that the heavily eroded structure was restored and renovated by pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. Based on the information provided, the following sequence of events can be formulated according to Robert Schoch's theory. Approximately 12,500 years ago, unknown architects erected the pyramid complex, encoding the alignment of 3 planets in the solar system within its layout and the orientation of the Sphinx statue to represent a specific date. Over time, the pyramids began to deteriorate, but the Sphinx, carved out of a monolithic rock and possibly buried in sand, endured. Around 8,000 years later, during the reign of the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty, the other structures were restored. It is also possible that the Sphinx underwent restoration. Schoch suggests that originally it depicted a lion, and the addition of a human head, specifically the likeness of Pharaoh Khafre, occurred during his reign. The most probable cause of extensive weathering was a combination of factors, primarily chemical erosion, possibly due to rainwater with a high concentration of corrosive compounds. Heavy rainfall could have played a role as well, although according to many climatologists, the period of heavy rains continued until at least 2300 BCE. Its cessation could have been sudden, coinciding with a drastic change in the climate regime across the entire Mediterranean and the Near East. That's all from me. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button. Your engagement means the world to me. Thank you for your attention. See you soon. Goodbye.